I think that lots of folk are intimidated by running D&D campaigns in large cities, but I honestly don't think that they are beyond most game masters' skill sets. I feel like even new game masters could successfully run enjoyable city campaigns if they wanted to. You see, city campaigns are not exclusively the domain of experts or veterans. So why is it then that we can often think like that? Like, lots of folk think that running a D&D campaign in a city is super challenging and they simply steer clear. And I think this is because we can have certain misconceptions about running city campaigns. We'll call them pitfalls of perception. These are the things that cause us to believe city campaigns are super hard to run and the domain of experienced dungeon masters alone. So let's talk about these 3 common pitfalls of thinking that I believe once you shatter, you'll find that running a city campaign, while perhaps still challenging, is certainly within your reach. Pitfall number 1, assuming that city campaigns are sandbox campaigns. I suspect that this is one of the principal things that terrifies folk about running city adventures. They think that running a city campaign means that they are running a sandbox game. I have run several city campaigns over the years. In fact, by default, most of the campaigns I have ever run were city campaigns that used Waterdeep, one of the largest cities in the Forgotten Realms, as the setting. And none of them were sandbox games. I always followed the standard RPG structure of giving my players plot hooks for one or more adventures that they might pursue. Now, sometimes the games may have felt like sandboxes because the characters could technically go anywhere, and because I would usually give them more than one plot hook or option of what to do next to work on resolving the campaign's main problem. But they weren't sandboxes. I was certainly guiding my players' direction through the use of plot hooks. Even though I never made them go anywhere, a well-designed plot hook will almost always get players going in a direction that the game master is prepared for, and will not leave them wandering about the city randomly. And if your players are wandering about the city randomly, I submit to you that you either 1, didn't give them plot hooks, 2, your plot hooks were poorly designed, or 3, you and your players need to have a frank and open discussion about the social contract that exists between players and game masters in RPGs. Now, if you're having trouble creating good plot hooks, I do have a couple videos that you might find helpful. I will throw links to them down below. Oh crap, out of coffee. I'll be right back, Zach. Hey, where did my coffee pot go?
Okay, listen, Zach, I'll make sure you get an extra big bonus this month if you don't cut this out of the video. Okay, now that we got rid of that idiot who likes to talk too much, I have a very special announcement for you. You know how we talk a lot on the channel about Describe and how their narrative descriptions are great? Yeah, well, we're not gonna do that again today. However, this time they have a super cool new feature, the Sonic Library. Now, it would be great if the Sonic Library were advanced weaponry that you could aim at your players' heads to obliterate them the next time they metagamed or ignored a plot hook. But unfortunately, that's not what it does, even though I have faith that the wonderful folks at Describe will someday develop that feature. Instead, the Sonic Library gives a vast library of sound effects and music. Okay, look. The Sonic Library basically gives you cool sound effects, music, and ambiance that you can play in your games. And it goes along with the narrative descriptions that Describe has always offered. Now, of course, you can play the sound and music at your game table, but it can also be streamed to your players over the internet. So if that isn't enough reason for you to go over to describe.com and check them out for free, then I'm gonna have to threaten you with my axe again, which I forgot to bring into this skit, so that's gonna be less effective than it should be.
Hey, get out of my chair and stop threatening Zach. He's not gonna put any of your sleazy plugs in this video. All right, you hear that, Zach? Nothing the barbarian said goes in this video. Nothing. Pitfall number 2, making the campaign and adventures all about politics. Listen, I personally don't enjoy campaigns or adventures that are mostly about politics. I may touch on politics from time to time, but they're not a main focus of my games. And yet, as I previously mentioned, I mostly run city-based campaigns. Being in a city does not equal needing to run adventures that deal with politics. You can still run bread and butter RPG adventures that deal with delving into dungeons or other locations as much as you want. You see, the city simply serves as the main location or the hub where the campaign takes place. In my opinion, what a city-based campaign really gives you is more options for not only your locations, but also the type of adventures you want to run. Okay, first let's talk about all the different locations where adventures might take place if you are running your game in a city. Well, first you got city buildings. Any city building, the palace, the castle, the tavern, the guild hall, any plethora of city buildings are available to you. Then of course you have the Underdark. I mean, you could have sewers or city buildings that link up to the Underdark, all the underground caverns where you could have tons of cool, interesting things take place. There could be ruins underneath there. They could come upon dwarven tunnels and a dwarven compound underground. You could have locations near the city where adventures take place within maybe half a day or a day of travel. I mean, look at Waterdeep. There are mountains to the north, a forest to the southeast, and then the ocean. Adventures can take place in any of those locations. You are not limited to the city itself. Okay, now let's take a look at the different types of adventures and campaigns that are possible. First, you have faction conflict. This is when you have issues ongoing between two different factions or more factions, which are just basically groups or organizations in the city. You could have one faction request help from the PCs in helping deal with whatever issue they have with the other faction. In my early Hand of Light campaign, the group was assisting the Red Sashes, a vigilante group, in rooting out a thieves guild that had moved into Waterdeep. Or the faction might just be a group that is serving as a patron for your party of adventurers and sponsoring the quests that they go on. I think patron games like this are lots of fun, and that's one of the reasons that we have published patrons and factions in Lair magazine. If you're looking for some of those, I'll point you to Loyalty and Lies, the January 2022 issue, or Shadow and Salvation, the September 2021 issue. Of course, there are other issues that have patrons and factions in them too. You'll just have to poke around in the DM Lair store to find them. You can also have your typical big bad villain as like the main focus of your campaign. Just because you're in a city doesn't mean there aren't bad guys. Shoot, just look at our modern cities. There are lots of bad guys there, right? The thing is that they skirt the law and they are difficult for authorities to either capture or prove guilty. So you just need to build some sort of rationale around that and the reasons that the city officials can't solve the problem themselves and that the characters need to get involved. And this isn't too hard either, in my opinion. This is how I see it. First, most of the guards and soldiers in a city are not very powerful, and they aren't suited for taking on powerful villains in groups. Thus, they outsource that work to adventuring parties who are 1, more powerful, and 2, expendable. Of course, big cities like Waterdeep do have their own powerful groups at their disposal, such as Force Grey, but they also have lots of issues and bad guys to deal with. And that keeps groups like Force Grey busy, meaning that they need to contract out work to adventuring parties. So just keep those things in mind the next time your players ask, why aren't the guards just dealing with this problem themselves? Which is a legitimate question. As long as you're prepared for it and have a good response, some rationale, everything will be okay. Sometimes I answer that question by simply saying, well, if the guards dealt with it, you wouldn't have an adventure to go on, and there would be no game, so yeah. Of course, that's not usually as satisfying as having a real reason, but we all know that that's the real reason, is that if the guards did everything, there'd be no game for us to play. Murder mysteries are another type of campaign that you could run, even though these tend to be individual adventures as part of a campaign and probably not the entire campaign themselves. Like, you wouldn't probably have an entire campaign that's only murder mysteries, unless of course you and your players really loved that sort of thing and that's what you wanted to play, and nobody's going to stop you and tell you that it's wrong, because it's not. It's fair if you really want to do that. And then of course we have politics, which you of course can run your campaign based around political adventures if you want to. Nothing's stopping you, and you got a whole city. Politicians abound, so there you go. Now, delving into the details of how to do all of these different types of adventures is way beyond the scope of this video, so I'm not going to go there, but those are definitely things that you could do, and I'm sure you can find some videos out on YouTube somewhere that delve into specifics on each type. By the way, if you're finding this information helpful, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment for the algorithm down below. Let me know what is your biggest frustration with running city campaigns, or what you find intimidating about them. Pitfall number 3, creating and fleshing out everything in the city. A game master may feel like they need to detail out everything in the city because the PCs are there and the GM might need them. Businesses, NPCs, groups, government, etc. However, this is a trap. Don't flesh out everything. just what you will probably need. Now, what I'm gonna do here is list out roughly in order of priority based upon my experience what you're probably going to need fleshed out a little bit in advance when you're running a city campaign. And this is assuming that the group is going to stay in that city for quite some time, perhaps the entire campaign. Otherwise, you don't need to flesh out nearly as many of things that I'm about to go over. But if it's a city the group is just passing through, then prepare the absolute bare minimum that you think you'll need, or just improvise it all at the table. But for a city where they're gonna stay there for a little bit of time, these are some of the high-level basics that I strongly recommend that you flesh out in advance. First, the type of government. What type of government is there? Is it a monarchy with a king? Is it more of a democracy where they have elected rulers? A council, like town council? Is it the church is in charge? So it's what do you call that? Oh my gosh. The heck is it when the church is in charge?
Theocracy. Holy freaking crap.
Theocracy. Hey, look at that. The phone helped me. Or do you have a theocracy? You want to know the name of the ruler or the rulers, or if there's a council or something, and maybe not all the members of the council, maybe not all the members of the Congress, but at least important members. Have some details about the military and the guards. How many are there? What types of soldiers are there? What weapons do they carry? What armor do they wear? What uniforms do they have on? These are things that are probably going to come up when your players travel to that city. What are the basic laws and punishments? What is the total population? How big is the city? What's the city structure like? Is there a wall around the city? Is the city split up into wards or districts? If so, what are they and what are they named? Usually there are wards for lower class folk, middle class nobility, and then wards for the docks if on a coast or a river, and commerce. Is there a predominant architecture throughout the city? And if so, what is it? And then you want to have yourself a map. You need a basic map that shows the locations of major landmarks and the specific locations you create. Okay, now what locations should you create? These are my recommendations for specific locations that you should create in advance because characters are very likely to go to them, or at least ask about them at some point. Taverns. You want about 3 of these or maybe more, ideally 1 for each district or ward of the city that give a distinct flavor to them. You might have 1 tavern where there's a giant barkeep and he just passes the food in the trays all the way across the tavern because his arms are so long. Also determine basic services at the taverns and how much they cost. Inns, pretty much the same as above. You want to have 1 or more inns in each of the different districts. You want to have their basic services and how much they cost. And remember too that oftentimes inns and taverns are one and the same. An inn many times has food and ale and all the sorts of amenities that a tavern would have. Different shops. At a minimum, you need these shops. Some place where they can buy weapons and armor, common adventuring gear, food, supplies, potions and spell components, horses and wagons and carts, and, magic stuff if you have it in your game world where they can actually buy magic. I personally don't do that, but lots of people do. You need to think about what goods are available at those shops and what they cost. I often just shortcut this by just using stuff directly from the player's handbook as far as what's available and what they cost. I mean, most things in the player's handbook are generally available in a large city. That's just kind of a given. But you could obviously detail this out a whole lot and get very, very specific about what's available in all the different shops and what they cost if you wanted to. And then you want to have a general market. This is kind of a catch-all area that has a variety of booths in case the characters want to buy something that you didn't create a shop in advance for. Basically, you just say that they're able to find someone in the market who has a booth set up for X thing and that they want to buy or sell. A palace or a castle, a place where the ruler or central government is housed. Players will either ask about it or visit it eventually. Consider what protection and guards are about it, which may be relevant when PCs are visiting. A guard post and barracks. Characters will at some point seek out the guards for some reason or another, so make sure you know what weapons, armor, and uniform they wear. So you can describe them to your players when they ask, because they probably will ask, and even if they don't, you should still describe them. You need to have a prison because characters, often sometimes end up there eventually, though I must say that managing such a situation is very precarious. Arresting players and taking players to prison, because it can cause some issues at the game table, I have found, but that's probably a topic for a different day. Temples and churches. This not only adds flair, but it always comes up in my games at one point or another. A player who worships X deity asks if there is a temple to that deity in the city. Also, characters will eventually seek out healing or other priestly magical aid and want to buy healing potions. So, know what spells the clerics there can cast and how much they cost, and the same for healing potions. A sage and or wizard. The group is often going to seek out information and or purchase or learn spells. So know in advance what subjects this sage is an expert on and how much they charge to share their knowledge. And if it's a wizard, of course, you want to know what spells they can cast and how much they charge. Usually different spell levels cost different prices, of course. A library. When the sage or wizard can't answer questions, the group will look elsewhere. This is where the library comes in, of course. So know what the base cost is to access the library, because you usually don't get in for free. Not in the ancient world. This is books and learning and stuff is expensive and a very prized commodity. So it's going to cost you a basic service to get into the library, be able to look around. And I usually have a second higher cost if the group wants to have the assistance of a librarian or aide who will help them find what they're looking for faster and potentially get them even better information than if they had done it alone. A bank. This may or may not apply based on your world and game setting. For instance, if you're in Eberron, there are definitely banks, but Forgotten Realms, maybe not, except in the greatest and most developed cities. Like Waterdeep probably has a bank, I would guess. And have an idea of the protections the bank has on its vault. Characters will either ask because they want to know their gold is safe, or they will want to break in. Also, listen to your players' chatter. If they mention they're going to go to X or Y place, but don't do it in that current game session, and you know you haven't prepared that place for them, then make sure you create those places in advance for the next game session. Oh, and if you're wondering what the best tool to use is for detailing all of these different things out that you're fleshing out for your city-based campaign, I highly recommend using OneNote or Evernote for this sort of thing. I made a video that goes over how I use OneNote to organize my games, which in turn saves me time at the game table. It's titled Top 10 Time-Saving Tools for Dungeon Masters. Okay, now on to NPCs. We made locations, but we didn't make NPCs to populate those locations. So for each one of those locations you fleshed out, you're probably going to want to have at least one NPC. Now, some locations beg for more, such as taverns. You probably want to have the owner, who is often the barkeep, a waiter or waitress, a bouncer or two, a local who frequents the joint, and then perhaps a minstrel. For a temple, you probably want to have a high priest, but also an acolyte, who will be the character's primary contact. For the guard barracks, there's almost certainly a captain or a commander that may become relevant, but mostly there should be a lower ranking sergeant or the like who will be the group's primary contact. And the same for the palace or castle. There is, of course, a king or ruling council or the like, but the characters aren't likely to encounter or meet with them except in extraordinary circumstances. So you need a primary contact, perhaps an advisor or a simple clerk. Now, listen carefully. Creating stat blocks for every NPC is a trap. Most NPCs will just use the commoner stat block. For exceptional NPCs, just pick a stat block from the monster manual or another resource and write it down. You do not need unique stat blocks for everyone. That's just crazy. You know how much time you're gonna spend creating unique stat blocks for every NPC in the entire city? The vast majority of which will never become relevant, and you will never need to use those stat blocks. So save yourself some time and headache. Just use the commoner stat block, or for very unique NPCs, pick a pre-existing one out of the monster manual or elsewhere. You know, I rarely myself consider stat blocks for NPCs in a town. If it even becomes relevant, I'll decide in the moment if they are just a commoner, because most NPCs are, or if it makes sense for them to have like the noble or veteran stat block, which are ones I go to a lot too. Now, some game masters groan when we talk about NPCs because in their experience, players just want to kill them all, so what's the point? Sometimes I think though that the players killing NPCs is in part the game master's fault at times. Because like a question that I ask, and sometimes this I've seen in games as well, is that the NPCs aren't really very likable. I mean, they're kind of annoying little pricks that are negatively predisposed toward the characters. And if all of your NPCs are annoying and they're negatively predisposed toward the characters and they aren't likable, then you should expect the players to want to kill them and take all their stuff. But if you are creating likable NPCs who are positively predisposed toward the PCs unless they have reason to not be, then you're probably going to get a different response from your players. Of course, if they still insist on killing NPCs, you can always introduce consequences for their actions, which I do recommend. In fact, I have an entire video that talks about how to deal with murder hobos that you can check out. Culture and background events. So building in culture and background events into your city campaign can add amazing flavor to your game and make it much more interesting. For culture, consider the lifestyle of the populace, commoners to nobles. How do they dress? What are their customs? Do they have any special slang words that they use? Consider background events that take place, holidays and festivals, special events that are going on in the city that you can describe to your players. By the way, if you're interested in more information about fleshing out a city or town, Trial and Trust, the September 2022 issue of Lair magazine, has an article in it titled Creating a Settlement. It goes over topics such as political or government structures, military, taverns, and the like, and includes tables that detail the various options you have. Click on the screen right here to learn how to create plot hooks that your players won't ignore and 6 pitfalls to avoid, or to become a DM Lair patron and get an issue of Lair magazine every month and play D&D with me. And until next time, best of wishes with your next city campaign. They really are tons of fun.